Good evening, everybody. How's the audio? It's okay? Good. Thanks for your patience and room relocation. I appreciate that. I left home this morning. It was almost raining. It was so humid, and it was 95 degrees at 6 a.m. in Virginia, so it's pretty fine here, I have to say. And so if we have a 78-degree evening with no humidity in Virginia, nobody goes to City Hall for anything. They could even be wanting to take your house, and you're not going. I very much appreciate coming out on a Monday night. Last week before the holiday, end of the summer. I'll speak to the issue of capacity momentarily, but I've been on the road more or less 2 weeks a month for 27 years in my job, and when a community comes out like this, it means something, and it means something really powerful and enduring. So I'll try to speak to that too. I got an email this morning. We've got some ticklers or whatever, so we know when we're in the news in one city or another. And so we got an MLive thing or whatnot this morning. And I thought it was a really good article, but I want to echo City Manager Rick Finn's comment a moment or two ago. I think that it had the word dismal in the headline. I want to dispatch with that right away. I would say that if I kept the whole article minus one or two sort of things I might nitpick at, I might retitle it as "It's a city at an undeniable fork in the road." I certainly wouldn't have called it "It paints a dismal picture," but again, we'll come back to that. So let me thank City Manager Finn for having me here, Terry, Paul Montagno, and Dick Carlisle of Carlisle Wortman are our clients. We've been privileged to work with them. I had the opportunity to work with Paul a couple of years ago, analyzing Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, Washtenaw County, and it's been a complete pleasure on this project. I'd like to also just a couple of other quick mentions. The Housing Commissioner, the Director of the Commission, Doug, has been tremendously helpful to us in the course of the many months that we've been on this project. Is Mr. Adamowski here? The chair of the Board of Realtors provided us with indispensable information. Without that information, we couldn't have done some of the fine-grained analysis. I want to thank the realtors. Al McFadden on the commission provided phenomenal feedback. I think I saw Al earlier someplace, but we've really benefited significantly from help at all angles. So if there's a headline for this, I've got a lot of slides. We can go through them. You can stop me, city commissioners, planning commissioners, housing commissioners. We can dial into it. I can go through it, do Q&A later. We can go in any way you want. But a couple of things. One headline is, housing is undeniably, it needs to be seen as economic development. It is not a stepchild to economic development in any market, whether that's Seattle or Austin, whether that's a recovering Michigan market. It is economic development. And so if we want to talk about that tonight, I would encourage that. Some non-housing comments before I jump right in. I'm not a fair weather friend. I was here in February, whereupon I immediately backed my rental car into one of the planning commissioner's cars right here in City Hall, and he made sure that I got him a check pretty quickly for those damages. And so, there was some color to the project early on. But being here in this City Hall, I can't tell you how many cities I've worked in Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, where city halls like this have been torn down. And whatever you did to keep this building has the DNA of what you're going to need to deal with this housing issue that you've got. So there should be these are often hard fights. They're usually 51-49 fights. But whatever you did to pull this off is something of a miracle, and you should be really proud. I'll try to go through some slides and draw on some of, and try to link some of our findings and the way we look at housing markets to the capacity that you had as a community to save this building. And because that's, I think, what we're ultimately going to be talking about. I don't know how to do this, so let's hope it works. That's not a good sign.
No, let's see if this
That's a good sign. Okay. Forward and backward, I can do that. Okay, so the first two slides, so we've got a 40 or 50 page report. Hopefully you have it or have access to it at some point. It's dry, it's boring in many cases. Charts are charts, right? But the first 2 or 3 pages here capture it all. So if you don't want to read anything, these first two slides should do it, and I'll just go through them. This is a market with notable strengths. There are significant historic residential assets. Just this afternoon at 6th and Lincoln or thereabouts, I spent some time this afternoon with a realtor who had just shown a young couple from Midland, a young employee at Dow, who didn't want to live in Midland, wanted to live here in Bay City, and bought a historic house, a wonderful Victorian that's been rehabilitated for $137. Okay? It was a fabulous transaction. And so the historic residential assets which we speak to in this report are not minor, that is not small stuff. The second is you've got great amenities here. Parks, waterfront, the retail is beginning to find its legs, okay, and match. So you have really important amenities. These are two very leverageable strengths. You're also a good buy. This is an affordable market, which means at the end of the day, the risks are being factored and folded into price. This is a good buy. It's a great opportunity for young families. You get a lot of house. That's sort of the first broad stroke, okay? Second, we nonetheless think that you're a market on the verge of being overwhelmed. We don't think you're overwhelmed, but we do think that you're at a fork in the road where you don't really, you obviously can do whatever you want, but we would strongly counsel you against making the wrong choice at this fork in the road moment. These are the points I want to draw your attention to. I guess there's slides on both sides. Excess overall supply, right? You got too many boxes, too many units and too many boxes. That just breeds a whole toxic slab of investor class, right, who are going to game the system. And eventually what happens is ownership gets, the tenure changes, you go from owner occupancy to renter occupancy. A good, healthy housing market absolutely has to have a renter component, okay? But when you have such excess supply, what you tend to have happen is the math of property ownership changes, right? And eventually what happens is part of the math is tax delinquency. And so you've got close to 3,000 tax delinquent residential properties in this city, right? So overall supply breeds all kinds of problems. You ask the city manager to manage the budget, but the revenue's not coming in. So we don't have the taxable base, right? And then the base we have goes unpaid. So it's a very difficult situation. Second, we've got long evident homeowner withdrawal and disinvestment. The key piece there to understand is not the homeowner withdrawal and disinvestment, important though that is, it's rather that it's been long evident, okay? Third is aging households, all right? So we're now sort of building this cocktail that's a bit of a problem to work through here. We got too many boxes, too many units, some disinvestment, aging households, and now what you have is what we call a demand problem, where your demand is less than your supply, which means there's no firm floor in your housing market. The values do not hit concrete anyplace. Right? There's not a level beneath which you're going to go that the market has confidence in, and consequently prices fall. And when prices fall, you become the less expensive option in a region. Right? You have a large amount of unpredictability block to block. Right? And so it's catch as catch can. Right? Now, so let's pause. I see a lot of people nodding. There's two reasons you hire a consultant. You hire a consultant to tell you what you don't already know, or you hire a consultant to tell you what nobody can actually say locally, but everybody knows, okay? I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. We're just going to go through it all so that I can actually confirm that what you know is true and you're not crazy, okay? And then finally, you are a market that we conclude is too weak to absorb any more self-inflicted wounds. That's the key thing here. You shoot yourselves in the foot too often here in Bay City. And so now what you need to do is draw upon the reservoir of what you did to save this building and point the gun someplace else instead of your own feet when it comes to your housing market. Okay?
John,
Yes?
we could just ask you this. In the mic.
In the mic. Got it. Right.
Thank you.
Numbers to focus on. Ooh, that works. Okay, so think about this. I'm not going to tell you right away what these are. Just look at those numbers. 2.02, 89 million, 56 years, 16%. I forgot what 8 is. Forget 8. And 207. So those are some numbers to think about. Okay? Anybody hazard a guess on any of these? Sir?
2.02 probably median household size.
Close, but that's not it. But that's actually a good guess for median household size. Yes?
56 years, that's how long we've been in a day car.
That's exactly right. In fact, forget all the other numbers. Just look at that number, right? 56 years. So that's our lives, everybody in this room, right? Okay, so 56 years we've been looking the other way, right, while a problem has been occurring, right? This is not a technical problem. This is I don't want to look at and deal with the problem. Okay, those are two different kinds of problems. Okay? 16%, so let's go through these. 2.02. In a healthy housing market, you have an income to house price ratio of at least 3, sometimes close to 4. Okay? When that number falls much below 3 and 2.02 is way below 3, what you end up with is a market where $30,000, right, buys the median income, buys the median price of a house. Okay? You have a very affordable market. It's not, in other words, you're not, when you have a multiplier of 2, what you would expect to pay in a healthy housing market, you can put in your own pocket. When you put it in your own pocket in Bay City, you're buying cell phones and flip-flops and boats instead of gutters and downspouts, and instead of a fresh coat of paint, and instead of a new roof every 11 or 12 or 15 years. So your roofs are sagging. You've got 3 and 4 layers of asphalt shingles, right? It goes unpainted and unscraped, unpower washed, right? All of that turns into $89 million a year of housing dollars that if you were a healthy market, you would be putting into your housing. In 10 years, that's close to $1 billion. $1 billion in your pockets that's not in your housing market. Right? That leads to negative equity, and that's been the cumulative condition for 56 years. Okay? 16%, that's the percentage of your population with a 4-year college degree. Okay? That number affects your housing market. It affects demand. All right? I can't remember what 8 is, and we'll come back to 207. Let's take a look at the population numbers. You can see here, okay, in the yellow line at the top, you can see where Saginaw was, you can see Midland, and you can see Bay City. All right? So this is a 56-year issue. Okay? Now let's take a look at what we think is an important indicator of some of the underlying economic strength of a market, which is on the x-axis, we've got a percentage of adult population with college degree, and on the y-axis, median family income. What tends to happen, so this is how we think of it in this so-called BCG 2x2 square. In the southwest corner, low education, low income. In the northeast corner, you have high education, high income. Those correlate. Okay? Michigan has loved being in the northwest corner. Okay? And that's where it's thrived pretty much from World War I to about 1972. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. In 2000, those purple dots represent where you were as a state, just some select cities that we mapped for you. In 2014, you can see the effect of the recession, and the slow climb out is not actually finished. Let's go back. That's where you were. You want to be in the northeast. You're in the southwest. You've fallen from where historically you were at World War II. That's where you were at 2000. This is where we are basically now. What you don't want to do is try to do that. But that is what you're used to. That's what you want to do. Okay? It's that type of transformational adaptation that saved this building and that will reposition you economically over the long haul and which you'll need to draw on for your housing market. So what to do? Let's take a look carefully at this chart. It's not an easy chart to look at. This is a target market analysis. This is what we would call a proper target market analysis. Okay? What you see here is what we call fair share analysis. When we look at the city vis-a-vis the county, and we equalize for your population differences, what is your fair share? All right? So for households at $15,000 a year annual income and lower, you have about 1.5 times your fair share of really struggling families. These are households that have great difficulty succeeding on a block. Okay? Great difficulty managing a piece of property as a resident. All right? When we go to the other end of the spectrum, you have 1/2 of your fair share of households, 2/3 to 1/2 your fair share of households earning $75,000 or more. What we want you to focus on there is the bar in the middle, which is between $35,000 and $74,000. You have perfectly your fair share. Those households, right, we don't want to lose. Anyone in this room who earns between 35 and 75, anyone you know in Bay City as a household between 35 and 75, that's how you rebuild this economy and that's how you rebuild your housing market. If you go lower than those numbers, it will be very difficult as a target, as a strategy, it will be very difficult to stabilize this market. So let's take a look at this piece here. That market, those households earning between 35 and 75 in a healthy housing market where the housing price to income ratios are north of 3, you should be looking at $122,000 to $260,000 housing market. If we don't see prices in that bandwidth, we know something's not working. What you have is a market instead that's between 17 and 77. So we've got to somehow work together within the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission, the Housing Commission, and the City Commission have to work together to move that red into the green there. So how to do it? We scored all your properties. All right, we put 4 eyes from our firm and another 6 eyes from student interns on every single one of your homes. We looked at your gutters, your downspouts. We looked at the pickup trucks on the front yard that sat there for 4 straight days. We looked at everything, okay? And we scored them all. When's the last time you power washed it? When's the you got maple trees growing out of the gutter, that are a foot tall, right? There were some pickup trucks that had a maple tree growing in the back of the pickup truck. The dirt, like the leaves had fallen in the bed, right? Over 2 winters, and then little sprouts came up, right? We scored all that. What that tells you when you look at that map is a lot of your property is yellow and orange. It's in the middle. It could go either way. The green is your strong, bankable property. So you should notice first and foremost, not a lot of green. We scored your properties independent of the castleness of them. We were looking only at how well they're maintained. So it could have been just a terrible small box, right, on Hampton. It could have been a fabulous house on Park. All we were paying attention to is, are there geraniums? Are you raking your leaves? Are you actually, fixing the mini blinds? Is the rusted shed out back actually on its way out? We're simply looking at the pride of ownership. This is a pride map. So we've got a lot of property. 70% of your city is sort of in the middle, trying to figure out, what do I want to be? What do I want to do? I rake my leaves? Do I clean my front porch, or do I let it go? Am I being frustrated by my neighbors across the street? Am I confident in this market? What we did then was when we upload those scores into averages, and then when we fold those in with 14 years of sales data, we ultimately map your city to be able to determine where might we actually get a return on an investment. And what we conclude typically is that we can turn yellow areas into green for far less money and far quicker than we can turn red and brown and orange areas into yellow in most cases. All right. So now the trick is where to focus. And what we do then is we begin to look in a qualitative way, block by block, until we can sort out where we think you can get a return on your investment. And what we concluded was that really along the Center Ave corridor, the east-west corridor, your historic districts, all right, you were going to get a high rate of return, all right? And so let's go through a couple of places that we would look at and recommend you look at. On the west side, we would recommend investing and stabilizing at your entry point into the city, all right? And on your far east side, complementing it with a barbell. What you've been doing is you've been trying to eradicate problems rather than build on your strengths. And it always costs more to do that, particularly when you're an aging population, okay, and when supply outpaces demand. So if we go, for instance, over to Ohio and Indiana and Jenny, and we look in that area as you enter, you can see here, and I don't know how clear this is, you've got properties that are real just fabulous homes. But just a block or two away, right, by St. John's, the Lutheran church there, it just takes a block or two away, and it falls across I think it's May Street. It falls off. Okay? And so now what you want to be thinking about as a city is, what public policies do we use at what cost to trigger what changes in the various housing types we see in that part of the city? That's how you want to be thinking. And typically, what happens is the conversation moves to code enforcement. If they would just take care of their property across the street, all would be well. Let's pick up the phone and call code enforcement. Except that almost never works. Okay? Code enforcement feels good for about 15 minutes when you make the call, and then actually the market doesn't change. The problem to solve is confidence in the market. Code enforcement and code compliance have a role to play, but it is a role that has to be complemented with financing to close the equity gaps that you have in the city. Concentrating those program dollars and those efforts at key places where you can get a return is how you dig your way out. So this is one example on the west side. If we go to the east side, all right, we go closer to Park, we get along 6th, 7th, 8th, for instance, we've got another opportunity. All right? And there we see some splendid homes just a block or two away from homes in really, really difficult condition. So let's suppose that bottom house is going to cost us $40,000 to buy and demolish. I'm just throwing out a number. And that's on the east side. And this house on the top right is going to cost us $40,000 to buy and demolish on the west side. But you only have $40,000. Which one do you take down? Historically, what you do is you spend a little on each instead of actually making a priority-based decision and doing one or the other and running with it at a sufficient level of funding to actually make a difference. These are the principles that we want to encourage you to follow as you attempt to dig out from an excess supply market. First is invest in the recoverable middle. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work. Some of your blocks are recoverable, some of your blocks are not recoverable. Some of your blocks don't need any help at all. Let's figure out where the recoverable middle is. We've done that for you. Focus on growing assets. Avoid genuflecting to the false god of fixing problems. Invest in what's working and stop whining about the guy down the street who's not taking care of business. All right? Let's find the people who actually put geraniums in their pots, all right, and rake their leaves and shovel their snow and mow their yard without being told to do so, and let's figure out where that's occurring in clusters and put our money there. That's how you rebuild a housing market. 3, you retain first. All this business about trying to attract folks from other markets, yeah, you want millennials, all right? Everybody wants millennials, okay? Yes, we would like to, get our fair share from the county and do a good job of competing against Midland and Essex and so forth and so on, all right? But you cannot attract until you retain first. And there's a lot of folks with 1 foot out the door, all right? And so it's the 1 foot out the door issue that we've got here to manage. That's what City Commission has to manage, all right? 4, build above market. Never allow any more going forward. If I had to pick one, do not build below market. Every time you build below market, you ratify an excess supply problem, all right? And you fail to seize the opportunity to move the needle where you need to move it, okay? If you have any questions about the language here, we'll make a note. We'll come to that later. Work where visibility matters. Some streets no one's going to see, ever. You are on the cusp of an existential problem for the city. Stop spending money, time, dollars, and calories on a house, on a block no one will ever see. The existential problem is to get the general fund, all right, into a position where your taxable base gives you a fund balance at the end of the year. All right? So with that, visibility matters. 6, concentrate geographically. If you have $100, don't spend $1 at 100 locations. So City Commission needs to be able to say no to 90 out of the 100 requests. City Commission, when it comes to housing markets, has to be in the business of disappointing folks. 7, make progress on getting the overall and cohort-specific supply and demand imbalance into shape. Right? So if somebody wants to add 10 units, great. Green light that. Okay? Make them take out 3 before they put in 10. Okay? Don't keep adding to the excess supply. 8, stop looking to Lansing and stop looking to Washington for help. Do it yourself. Use local capital and be patient with it. Solve your own problems. Okay? There's a greater dividend to doing it yourself than having somebody else do it, not least of which is the rules imposed by Lansing will not work for you. They will work for Detroit. They will not work here in Bay City. So the state legislature will write a housing rule that will work perfectly fine for a larger market and will actually stress your market. So get comfortable doing your own money. And then finally, but not last, the article in MLive got it right. The holy grail is resident leadership development. That's the 9th principle. So here's an example. Housing markets work at a fractal basis, right? Which is just to say that at any scale, the same argument can be illustrated. So here's an example of how, with some granularity, your city looks when we drill in. We've got at the far left a school, in the middle a small park, on the right a church. Okay? I know everybody's looking to figure out which street is this. I'm not going to tell you. What I want you to see here is we've got a few vacant parcels. We have some vacant structures. All right? Here's what you can afford. You can afford to raise 5 red dots to orange. Or you can move 8 oranges to yellow, or 12 yellows to light green, or 15 light greens to dark green. What are you going to do? This is where everybody wants to do stuff in Michigan. This is what Washington is going to pay you to do, right here. And while you're doing this, and it takes 20 years, people here are fed up. And they're out. They're going to check out. That's called opportunity cost. Do not be persuaded that you can dig your way out of a citywide weak housing market by focusing here. Focus here. Now, you can be creative, and you can do some things around the school and here, but here's what you can't do. You can't fix this one, and this one, and this one, or even just these 4. You've got to be in service of a larger objective. and which is this. I hope I'm not taking anybody's houses in this picture here. It just dawned on me just now I might have done that. This is actually a pretty neat house right over here. Now's the time to intervene, okay? It was probably aluminum sided. My guess is 1958, 1957. It was probably washed when Kennedy was president, and then nobody ever did anything to it. But it's still there. It's still got some pride. The lawn has been cut, right? Somebody's a little bit limited. Eventually, it's not just going to show the wear and tear that an elderly can't get to. It's actually going to show, here's what's going to happen. That elderly person is either going to move to Florida or some other phase of life. And when they do so, their son is going to take that house and not be able to sell it. Well, they're going to try to sell it. They're going to put it on the market for $65, and then it's going to be relisted for $58, and then it's going to be relisted for $47, and then it's going to go for $36 to some knucklehead in Detroit or Slovenia who's in the basement trolling for internet properties, right? Then it's going to turn into a rental over here, all right? And then somebody who's really down on their luck is going to rent that property out, and the standards are going to be declining. They're going to collect rent for about 2 years. Maybe they'll put some indoor or outdoor carpeting on the front porch. Maybe they'll go ahead and put some drywall up if somebody punches a hole in the drywall. They'll do that for a year or two, and then they'll collect some rent, and then they're going to walk away and leave the city with a vacant property and a tax bill. It's going to turn into this property. What typically happens in Bay City is you intervene in this space. The time to intervene is here or earlier. Okay? And the big shift is to figure out, what are we in service of? And good, healthy housing policy is in service of demand, not need, price stability, and these folks up here who are taking care of business. All housing policy has to serve these folks. If what you do in these properties doesn't help these folks will leave your city. And if they don't leave your city literally, they will leave your city figuratively, and they'll end up as that house. Your housing policy typically is down here. It needs to decide that the customer is up here. And if it doesn't serve that customer, you probably shouldn't do it. So as you evaluate your comprehensive plan, as you evaluate the housing elements in it, how that relates to zoning, how that relates to your use of your own general fund, I would encourage you to consider those pieces and come back to these principles. And if you're moving far off of these principles, you're probably taking the wrong path in that fork in the road we think you're at. We do not think this is a dismal situation, but we do think it's a situation that requires attention.